Today I have John Mullins, who's professor at the London School of Business, who wrote a book called The Customer Funded Business, which which I just finished reading and absolutely loved it. And for years, people have been saying that I should write a book about bootstrapping or customer funded businesses. And now, after reading John Mullins' book, I can honestly say I don't need to write a book anymore because he wrote a book as good as I could have ever written, if not certainly better than I could have written. And so I just had a long lunch recently with John here in Boulder. He commutes back and forth between Colorado and London, and I thought, wouldn't it be neat if we could just sort of have a Q&A, go back and forth a little bit on customer-funded businesses. So thanks for taking the time to do this interview with me, John.
Yeah, happy to do it, Bill. It's great to be back in touch.
So what attracted you to write a book about customer-funded businesses?
Well, I'd written an earlier book. In 2009, I wrote a book with Randy Commissar, who's a partner at Kleiner Perkins, called Getting to Plan B. And that's about business models. And there's a chapter in that book that really sort of captured my imagination. It's a chapter about working capital models that have what I call negative working capital, where the company has more of the customer's money around than they really need. So they always have cash, which is not typically the case in many growing companies. So I really got intrigued by companies like Costco, for which that's the case, which I wrote about in that chapter. And I said, I think I want to study this phenomenon a little bit more. That's kind of what professors are supposed to do, study stuff and see what we can learn. So I started looking for other companies that had these great working capital models because they'd gotten their money up front from customers. And, long story short, the book is the result.
And about how many customer-funded companies would you say you've studied?
In the process of doing the research for the book, we studied about 40 companies in a little bit of depth, and about I suppose around 20 of them actually made it into the book. But along my journey and working with these ideas and talking with entrepreneurs about them, I continually come across companies that are funded this way, and lots of entrepreneurs say, oh yeah, that's what I did too. Of course, doesn't everybody do that? Well, no, everybody doesn't.
And how specifically do you define customer funded?
The notion here is that a customer funded business is one where you, through one of the 5 models I describe in the book, get the customers to pay you early in the process. There are different ways to do it, but in any event, to pay you before you have to pay your suppliers. That's the basic idea. So you get customer money, and then you hang on to that money and can use it for whatever you need to use it for to grow the business. And meanwhile, you don't have to pay the suppliers part of that money until later. So you get to kind of work off the float.
Mm-hmm. And what are the subsequent advantages of being a customer funded business?
Well, there are a bunch of them. Number one, you don't have to put up with all the drawbacks of being a venture capital funded business. So, if you're a VC funded business, raising capital is a huge distraction, takes an enormous amount of time, and you end up paying attention to investors rather than customers. And in a customer funded business, you pay attention to customers, and that's fundamentally a good thing. And also in venture backed businesses, there comes a time almost always in the business where the goals of the VC and the entrepreneur misalign, and then you're stuck with a VC fund that's maybe at the life of the fund, and they have to sell, but you don't really want to sell. You don't have those problems when you have a customer funded business. So you avoid all of that. But then the plus side of it is that you're really focusing on solving problems with customers. And at the end of the day, that's what a good business is about. If it solves customer problems better than somebody else does, those customers will come back to you. So it does that. It also gives you enormous freedom, because if you have, the proven traction of customers, sending you checks before you have to pay other people with the money that's in those checks, you sleep way better at night. I think it's a really powerful way to build a business, as you well know.
I do. So why doesn't everybody do it then?
Well, I think over the last couple of generations, the VC world, VCs, incubators, business angels, that whole community has sort of captivated the entrepreneurial world, really, with the astonishing returns they've created for their investors, sometimes astonishing returns, not always, and the fantastic companies that ecosystem has created, Google and Facebook and Apple and on and on and on. So there are great stories there, and that's made great press. So I think everybody's kind of become fascinated with that and kind of drunk the Kool-Aid and say, oh yeah, I'd like to be Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs too, So I guess I need to go out and raise some money too. So I think everybody kind of bought into this idea without realizing that actually the vast majority of fast-growing companies never raise any venture capital. If you look at the Inc. 5000 list or other lists like them, where I work in London or other parts of the world, most of the companies on those lists never raised any venture capital. They got money from their customers, but it just hasn't been talked about, or at least not till now.
Mm-hmm. So there's that challenging part about sort of getting companies off the ground, starting that process of getting customer funding, getting real revenue from customers. What have you seen has been successful with these other companies that you've studied, and how they've gotten off the ground? What's been successful in if you can just give a couple examples.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that surprised me as I studied this, and I spent about a year and a half really digging into this topic, is there isn't just one way to do this. There are 5 ways to do it. So one of the ways is what I call a pay in advance model. You just simply get the customer to pay you before you deliver what they buy. And so if you think about it, that's what Michael Dell did from his dorm room at the University of Texas many years ago. He was calling on small businesses in Austin and asking them if they needed a computer, and he'd give them exactly the right computer, but he'd ask them to pay for the computer before he went and bought the parts and assembled the parts and delivered the PC. So that's not rocket science. It's a pretty simple idea, but that's what he did. That's what Costco does. We have to pay $50 a year to shop at Costco. Well, the $50 a year that we pay in advance for the privilege of shopping Costco funds in the aggregate 2/3 of Costco's operating profit every year. It's a staggering number, but who would know? So that's one way. You simply get the customer. You find a way to get the customer to think it's in their interest, to pay you in advance. You have to give something for that, obviously. Dell gave the right computer. Costco gives us great deals. So that's one model. Another model is what I call matchmakers, what many people call marketplaces. And if you think about what eBay or Airbnb do, they just bring buyers and sellers together, but they never touch the goods or own the goods. And so these days, it doesn't cost much to build a website, to get some suppliers to sign up and get some customers to sign up. And you can just kind of build that kind of a business organically at the beginning. If you want to then grow it fast, if you discover you get traction like Airbnb did, then maybe you raise some capital at some point, or maybe you don't. But in the early days, it doesn't cost you much to get those suppliers and those customers if you've got something that's appealing to both sides of that dyad. So that's 2 of the models. A third one is subscription models. And of course, they've been around forever. We all subscribe to stuff, right? We have cable TV and we have the Wall Street Journal and, all kinds of things we subscribe to. Well, when do you pay for those? Well, you pay, part of it, sometimes all of it up front. And meanwhile, the publisher or the cable TV company or whoever it is, has our money and then can use that money to grow the business before they have to, pay it to suppliers. So that's a third one. A fourth one is scarcity. So that's what Zara does, the fashion retailer. It's figured out that unlike Gap, where I used to work, it creates scarcity in what it sells. So with every style that Zara puts in the store, they limit how much of it there is. So the customer is kind of trained that if you see something you really like, it's kind of a fashion conscious customer they have at Zara. if you see something you like today, you better buy it because you know next week it's not going to be there. So they train the customer to buy it quickly. And meanwhile, Zara has great terms from its suppliers and doesn't pay the supplier for what the customer bought today for probably, 50 or 60 days. So again, they have your money.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last model is what I call service to product models. And that's what Bill Gates and Paul Allen did at Microsoft. They were writing operating systems for the big, well, they weren't big at the time, the nascent players in the PC industry, all of whom needed an operating system. And Gates and Allen knew how to do that. And there weren't many people who did. So they wrote one for Rico, and they wrote one for Altair, and they wrote a whole bunch of them. And they all kind of looked pretty much the same. And after a while, they said, these are all pretty similar. Why don't we just write one and we'll call it MS-DOS? And instead of having a customized service that we do every time we get a new player who needs an operating system, we'll just let them license DOS and download it with a PC or sell it in a shrink wrap box. And by switching that business from a service business where they had to hire people to write code and take months to complete the project, all of a sudden they had a product they could sell, and it became highly scalable. And that's where all the value in Microsoft got created. So there are these 5 very different ways to do it, but as I say, they're not new, and they're certainly not rocket science.
And I think in each of the models, it's interesting because as I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, people in startup businesses, particularly, they're looking to sort of figure out how to get that first nugget of technology built to see if they have a market for the customer. Yep. The ones that I found, and including my own companies, the way they've gotten started is they built, they first found customers that they asked, what would you buy? And once they told them what they would buy, then they built the technologies for them. And that, yep. That enabled them to effectively sort of know what their customers were going to buy before even building it, which I think is the biggest differential that I tend to see is a lot of people build something first before seeing if their customers will buy it versus knowing their customers will buy it first. And then, you talk about Michael Dell or Microsoft and that the way they started, and I think it very much was they had customers that wanted to buy, and they built it. And the other thing, especially today with AdWords and pay-per-click, you can see what people are willing to buy just by putting some pay-per-click ads up to a website that says sign up here to be able to buy this, and then you can also know demand. I want to sort of move to the next level, which is, I also talk to a lot of companies who are and entrepreneurs who are off the ground, growing. Maybe they bootstrapped it, but I find that they're constantly asking themselves, should they raise money to grow the company further? And
classic question, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. And I say, well, that's interesting. You've really bootstrapped and customer funded this business to this point. Why give up the equity now and bring in the extra money? And there's this feeling that they may be missing out on a bigger market. So how do you what has been your observations on companies that are considering their options for growth, and how that plays into, do I continue as a customer-funded business and grow off my own profitability, or do I go out and raise $1 million or a couple $1 million to further potentially accelerate the growth?
Yeah, I get asked that question all the time too, and I don't think there's a simple right answer to it. But I think I think there are some things to think about as you face that decision. I think one of them is whether you're in a situation where anybody else down the street could be doing the same thing too. So Airbnb, when they started, they were matching up, people who had couches to surf on or spare bedrooms, with people who wanted those things. But anybody else could have built that website, and anybody else could, go start, lining up people who have spare rooms and offer to rent them. So if you're in an industry where there are low barriers to entry and anybody could copy you, then at some point you may say, gee, I think this is a winner-take-all market, and therefore the winner's probably going to be the guy who's best funded, and maybe I should go raise some capital. On the other hand, in many circumstances, the entrepreneur really has something that's quite unique, and he has quite a head start on what others could do. And it may be that what's been done is difficult enough that it's kind of unlikely to get copied anytime soon. And therefore maybe it's not necessary to go raise capital. And there are lots of examples. Sramana Mitra writes a blog called the 1 Million by 1 Million blog, and she talks all the time about these billion-dollar unicorns that have been entirely customer funded. So, sometimes you can get very, very big without customer funding, but that's largely a function of whether somebody can easily copy you and, basically come eat your lunch, or whether you've gotten something that's really unique. I tell the story, as you know, in the book, of Go Viral, the Danish company that set out in 2003 to make online video cool for advertisers. This was before YouTube had launched, and they built that company entirely with customer funds. No money went into it ever. And from 2003, they sold it in January 2011 for just short of $100 million. And, that was entirely customer funded. Well, most entrepreneurs would kind of like that kind of ROI, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, what, in your observation, what percent of the time would you say, yeah, this is something that really should go get extra funding to fuel the growth?
I think the vast majority of the time it shouldn't. If you look at the lists of fast-growing companies, like the Inc. magazine list, for example, only a single-digit percentage of those companies in that list ever raise venture capital.
So less than 1 out of 10.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have a similar experience where it is pretty rare as I'm talking to entrepreneurs where less than 1 out of 10 where I would say, yeah, you probably should go get some funding, but the other 9 out of 10, it's very clear that they're better off growing it through their own through their own profitability.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've all become mesmerized by this VC ecosystem, and it's great stories and great press, and wouldn't we all like to be Steve Jobs? But the fact is that most kind of normal businesses, even tech businesses, aren't going to be an Apple, or aren't going to be a Dell, or aren't going to be a Microsoft, or an Airbnb, or a Facebook. And I think you have to be rational enough to take a careful look at what you're building and say, does this really have the potential to be one of those things? Because if it doesn't, that's what the VCs are looking for. That's all they want today is unicorns. And getting on that treadmill is a really tough game to play if you don't really have the potential in your company to be one of those kind of things. And the facts are, the latest research shows that 3 out of 4 venture capital-backed companies fail to return the capital that goes into them. That's pretty tough odds.
Yeah. So would you say that, given those statistics, would you say those 3 out of 4 companies, some of them might still be around if they customer funded?
Yeah, they probably would.
And why is that?
Well, because they'd grow at a sustainable rate. I mean, look at some of these companies that are growing really fast, like Airbnb or Dog Vacay, or some of these online marketplaces, or those kinds of businesses. Well, the reason they're growing so fast is that the venture capital money is being used to buy customers at extraordinary rates, right? They just put all that money into customer acquisition, figuring that will create enough market cap that money's well spent. And you don't have to grow it that fast. You can grow it a lot slower and still be growing fast. One of our former students at London Business School is a guy named Nitzan Udon, and he's built a business called Flat Club. Now, wouldn't you think that the sort of lodging market, whether it's vacation lodging or whatever, like Airbnb does, wouldn't you think that's saturated? Well, you would. But he's building a very nice business that's got a really narrow niche for medium-term stays, 3 to 6 months. And that's not something that Airbnb really does, or that Booking.com and those kind of people, or HomeAway, really do. And he's got a really nice little niche, and he's raised a little bit of money from some angels, but very little. And he's fundamentally growing it, at a very nice clip, with the money that's coming in from his share of those rentals that happen.
Mm.
So you don't have to grow at 1,000,000% a year. You can grow
Yeah.
20% month on month in these kind of businesses. That's pretty nice. You can do that for a long time.
And that's a great lead-in for my next question. A long time. I feel like there entrepreneurs that are going out and raising growth capital don't really make the connection between doing that and whether that's going to affect the longevity by which they will personally be able to own the business.
Well, I tell my students at London Business School, the day you raise $1 of venture capital is the day you've agreed to sell your business.
Mm.
You need to know that going in, but people don't think about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Venture capital funds have a life, and at the end of that fund, the VC is going to be gone and maybe gone sooner, and they're going to want to sell it. And, maybe occasionally one gets IPO'd, but the vast majority of the deals get sold in trade sales, and you end up selling to a bigger company, and now you have a boss. Well, most of the entrepreneurs I know aren't in it because they want to have a new boss, right?
That's right. That's why they got started, is they didn't want a boss. So, yeah, that's great. Well, I think obviously I love your perspective and philosophy. It's lined up a lot with what I've learned and experienced. My having built and been involved with a lot of customer funded businesses. So I really appreciate what you've done to sort of get this out in a bigger way, certainly through a book and promoting it. What is your hope and wish if you could, snap your fingers and have anything, have this whole philosophy turn into something? What would be your vision for this?
Well, I think the first thing is, this is the book, that's what it looks like. The first thing is I like people to put these ideas in the book to work. There are 5 ways to do this, and I want people to read the book or go on the MOOC that I'm building now that'll go live in March, and I'd like them to put these ideas to work. That's what I want to see happen. I want there to be more of a balance between venture funding and customer funding. There's nothing inherently wrong with venture funding. I've raised it myself. I've provided it myself. I'm an active angel investor. So I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with it, but it just is often done way too early. The time to raise capital, if you're going to raise capital, in my judgment, is after you've proven that you have customer traction, and then you face a fork in the road. Do I really need to raise capital, and should I, or can I continue down this road? And my hope is that we'll have more entrepreneurs kind of continuing down this road. In most parts of the world, outside of Silicon Valley and Boulder and Austin and New York, there isn't a fertile venture capital ecosystem, and it's really hard to raise money. So one of my key goals here was to give people the tools to say, gee, there's really another way, and I can do it another way.
That's great. And you're coming out with an online course that people will have, the general public will have access to?
Yep, it'll be completely free. It'll be on Coursera, and it's kind of these ideas. It's not the whole book. You can't do a whole book in a few hours of online material, but it'll give people the tools and hopefully the inspiration to say, yeah, maybe I need to think about this a different way.
And when will that be available?
Sometime in March.
Great. Super. Well, thank you so much, John, for taking the time with me to do this interview, and I love chatting with you about this topic, and look forward to seeing you get the word out more, so that I don't have as much work on my hands to do it.
Well, Bill, we're partners in crime here. We got a big job to do, but I'm glad we're both heading down this path. Thanks a lot for having me on. It's great to talk to you, as always.
Great talking with you.
Yep. See ya.